Kidnapped by my Mafia love. Victoria was in her salon, the familiar hum of hairdryers blending with the cheerful chatter of her clients. The space was alive with laughter, as she and a group of regulars swapped stories, their spirits high despite the gray clouds outside. The walls of the salon were adorned with photographs of her clients' transformations and inspirational quotes that spoke to the beauty of confidence and individuality. Victoria worked deftly, her skilled hands weaving magic as she styled a client's hair into soft waves. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had opened the salon in the first place, to create a haven where people could feel beautiful and cared for. Suddenly, the cheerful atmosphere was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. A man in a gray suit, accompanied by a stern-faced woman holding a clipboard, stepped inside. The laughter died down as they introduced themselves as inspectors from the city. They conducted a thorough examination, their expressions growing grimmer with each passing moment. Finally, the man cleared his throat and addressed Victoria. "Ms. Moore, I'm afraid the building is not up to code. The cracks in the foundation and the state of the roof are serious safety hazards. You'll need to make substantial repairs or we'll have no choice but to shut the salon down." His words hit her like a blow. She stood frozen, clutching her scissors as the weight of their verdict sank in. The clients exchanged worried glances, and Victoria's mind raced. She had poured everything into this place. Losing it was not an option. A week later, Victoria adjusted her scarf as she stepped into the bank, clutching a worn folder containing her business plan, financial statements, and a few photographs of her hair salon. That salon wasn't just a business, it was her life. She had poured every ounce of her heart and soul into transforming it into a haven for clients seeking a little beauty and confidence. The salon was more than a workspace. It was her dream made real, a place where she had fought to create something of her own after years of setbacks and struggles. But now, the cracks in the building's foundation and the leaky roof threatened to undo everything she had sacrificed for. It felt like watching the only thing that anchored her to hope slowly crumble, and the fear of losing it filled her with a desperation that tightened her grip on the folder. This loan was her last chance to save what mattered most to her. She glanced at the imposing marble counters and the row of tellers, her stomach fluttering with nervous energy. The bank manager, a stern but fair man named Mr. Rollins, had agreed to meet her after she pleaded her case over the phone. "You've got this," she whispered to herself as she walked toward the private office where her appointment was scheduled. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, the sound echoing faintly in the cavernous space. As she passed by the line of customers waiting at the counters, something felt off. The air seemed heavy, almost charged, and the usual bustling murmur of the bank felt unnaturally subdued. A group of men dressed in dark clothes entered the bank, their steps deliberate and synchronized. Victoria's stomach tightened as she noticed one of them lingering near the entrance, his eyes scanning the room with unsettling precision. Another man placed a hand on the glass doors, closing them quietly but firmly, then flipped the sign to closed. The muted click of the lock echoed in the cavernous space. Victoria's pulse quickened as she caught sight of subtle nods exchanged between the men, their movements too smooth to be accidental. Her unease grew when she saw a teller glance nervously at the men, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. Just as Victoria's mind started racing to piece together the situation, one of the men pulled out a handgun, its metallic glint catching the overhead lights, and sent a wave of panic rippling through the room. "Nobody move!" the man with the gun shouted. His voice was cold, commanding. "This is a robbery." Gasps and screams filled the air as people froze or crouched to the ground. Victoria's heart raced. She ducked behind a column, clutching her folder tightly, the edges digging into her palms. The devastation of her crumbling salon flashed in her mind. All her dreams, her sacrifices, and the life she had built seemed to hang in the balance. But she couldn't linger on those thoughts now, not in the middle of a robbery. Her mind was spinning, struggling to focus on the immediate danger. This couldn't be happening, not today. The robbers spread out, corralling the bank employees and customers into a corner near the counters. One of them, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, scanned the room. His gaze landed on Victoria. For a moment, their eyes locked, and she felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unsettlingly familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. The man with piercing blue eyes didn't approach Victoria immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to the room, barking orders to the other robbers and directing the bank employees and customers to sit down in the middle of the marble floor. Victoria watched as everyone was forced to move, the sound of shuffling feet and muffled sobs filling the air. Her breath caught in her throat as one of the robbers began strapping people's wrists together with zip ties, ensuring no one could move freely. She ducked lower behind the column, her heart pounding like a drum as she clutched her folder tightly. The man's commanding presence seemed to orchestrate the chaos as he pointed the other robbers toward the vault and counters, delegating tasks with practiced ease. Victoria's stomach churned as she realized how professional they seemed. This wasn't a random crime. It was methodical, deliberate. She tried to stay perfectly still, praying the column would keep her hidden, but her mind kept racing back to her salon, her life, and how it all felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Just as she thought she might be safe from notice, her blood ran cold. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the man with blue eyes glance subtly toward her hiding spot. At first, he seemed to ignore her, continuing to issue orders and monitor the others, but then his movements shifted. Quietly, without drawing attention, he began walking toward her column. His steps were deliberate, and his gaze fixed. Victoria's pulse thundered in her ears as she shrank back, clutching her knees to her chest, praying he would turn away. He didn't. The moment his shadow loomed over her, she felt a jolt of panic. Before she could react, the world around her blurred, and everything went black. When Victoria came to, she was lying on a plush leather couch in a dimly lit room. The scent of leather and faint cologne filled her senses as she tried to piece together what had happened. Her head throbbed, and her vision was blurry, but she could make out the outline of a figure sitting in a chair across from her. "You're awake," a deep voice said. It was warm, tinged with regret. Victoria blinked, her vision clearing. The man sitting before her looked familiar, his face more mature but unmistakable. It was Adrian, her childhood best friend and first love. The boy who had moved away without a word over a decade ago. "Adrian?" she whispered, disbelief coloring her tone. "It's me," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Victoria. I didn't have a choice." She sat up slowly, her heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. "What are you talking about? Why are you here? What is going on?" Adrian ran a hand through his dark hair, his expression conflicted. "It's a long story. I've been looking for you for years. When I saw you at the bank today, I knew I couldn't let you go, but I couldn't explain anything there. Not in the middle of that." "You mean the robbery?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Were you part of it? Did you kidnap me?" He flinched at her words. "Yes, but it's not what you think." Victoria stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. It sounded absurd, like something out of a movie. "You kidnapped me? And you are robbing banks now?" Adrien hesitated, as though grappling with the weight of the confession he was about to make. Adrien said, his voice low but firm, "I'm the son of a very powerful man. My father. He runs one of the most influential Mafia families in the region." Victoria's heart dropped and her breath hitched. "Mafia," she whispered, the word tasting foreign and sharp on her tongue. "Yes," Adrien continued, "and this robbery wasn't about the money, not really. The bank. They've been exploiting this community for years, offering easy loans to people like you, business owners, families trying to make ends meet, and then hiking up interest rates, finding ways to evict them from their homes and shops when they can't keep up. My father, he's done terrible things, but he believes in protecting the community, in delivering justice where no one else will. This robbery was about sending a message." Victoria's mind spun. "You're telling me this was revenge?" Adrien nodded, his expression conflicted. "Yes, revenge for all the families ruined, for every life torn apart by their greed. I know it's hard to understand, but when I saw you in that bank, I couldn't risk not seeing you again. You mean too much to me. Today was supposed to be the final piece of the puzzle, but then I saw you, and I couldn't just leave you there." She shook her head, still struggling to believe him. "So what? You knocked me out and dragged me here?" "I had to get you out of there," he said, his tone earnest. Victoria's mind raced. She had so many questions, so many emotions bubbling to the surface. Anger, confusion, relief, and a strange sense of longing. She had spent years wondering what had happened to Adrian, why he had disappeared from her life, and now here he was in the middle of a situation she could barely comprehend. "You should have told me who you were," she said, her voice trembling. "Instead, you dragged me into this mess without warning." Adrian sighed, his expression heavy with regret. "I didn't want you to see this side of my life, Victoria. I wanted to find you again, to tell you everything when the time was right. But when our paths crossed today, I couldn't walk away. Not after everything we've been through. I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped wondering what could have been." Her heart ached at his words, but she couldn't let herself be swept away by nostalgia. "What happens now? Am I in danger?" "Not anymore," Adrian said. "I've made sure of that." He reached out, taking her hand in his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "I am here now, Victoria. To stay this time, and I'm not leaving you again. I know it's a lot to take in, but I've always dreamed of finding you and being part of your life again." Victoria felt the warmth of his hand and looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception. But all she saw was the boy she had loved and the man who had fought to protect her, no matter how complicated his life had become. Deep down, she knew she could trust him, just as she always had. A smile tugged at her lips as tears welled in her eyes. "You're really staying?" "I am," he said softly. "If you'll have me?" Without thinking, Victoria closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his, the kiss full of longing and unspoken promises. Adrian wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as if he never wanted to let go. When they finally parted, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I do know one thing. We'll figure it out. Together." Adrian smiled, his expression full of hope. Together,